Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with Mr. Snyder. Today we enter the kind of changing of the guard when Andrew Jackson becomes president in 1828. And we're going to talk about the era of Jacksonian Democracy. Learning targets today are to talk about the link between Andrew Jackson and expanding democratic rights to the common man. We'll talk about Andrew Jackson and Indian removal, not his greatest hour, and we'll discuss the nullification crisis and the National Bank. So just a little bit about Jackson to kind of give you an idea of what kind of a guy he is. He's a Revolutionary War veteran. He joins at the age of 13, so he's a courier, so he carries messages back and forth. He is held by the British as a prisoner of war. He's captured. He nearly starves to death, so he's a tough guy. He's the hero at the Battle of New Orleans at the last major battle of the War of 1812. He defeats 9,000 British troops with 4,000 Americans and only 16 artillery guns. So very, very tough guy, Andrew Jackson. He likes to duel. He has bullets in his body. He's nicknamed Old Hickory for his toughness. He then becomes military governor and gets into politics of Florida. Spain cedes Florida to us, and he becomes military governor of Florida, just getting the land set up for United States use in 1821. He's the first American president that wasn't born rich. I mean, he's connected with the frontier. He's not born in the cities in the 13 colonies. He's the last veteran president of the Revolutionary War, and he's the first one to be popular with the common man. See, we've got all these old founding fathers who people seen as not really that tough, maybe except for George Washington. But now Andrew Jackson is very, very tough, and he is popular with the common man. So Jacksonian democracy, the definition is it's the politics during the 1820s. This era is becoming more and more democratic. More and more people start to vote because they see one of their own as possibly being president. So the popular vote expands to over 2.5 million people voting in the presidential election in just 16 years. States begin to choose the presidential electors by popular vote, and new rules lead to any tax-paying white male can vote. You don't have to own land anymore. So new rules are making it so poorer people can vote, but there are some limits, as some blacks and all women still can't vote. So we get to the election of 1824, and Andrew Jackson, here's the problem. We have four major candidates running, so Andrew Jackson wins the popular vote, but we don't decide the presidential election by the popular vote. We use the Electoral College, so nobody gets a majority of that, and one of the guys dies while they're trying to figure this out, so it's down to three. Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and John Quincy Adams, John Adams' son. And so Henry Clay knows he's not going to win, so he throws his support behind John Quincy Adams in the House of Representatives, because they are both, that's how they decided the House of Representatives votes when nobody gets a majority of the Electoral College. So Adams ends up winning because Henry Clay and his supporters throw their support behind John Quincy Adams. Adams then appoints Clay a very prestigious position, Secretary of State. Jackson claims it was a quid pro quo. You do something for me, I do something for you. A corrupt bargain is what he called it, and he starts preparing for the next election right away. So in 1828, it's John Quincy Adams from the National Republican Party versus Jackson, who is the Democratic Party. It's one of the dirtiest campaigns in history. They start throwing accusations at each other's families that John Quincy Adams provided prostitutes for the Tsar of Russia when he visited the White House. They call Rachel Jackson basically a whore because she started dating Andrew Jackson, before she was divorced from her first husband. So Jackson wins this dirty campaign with all this mudslinging going on, and his wife passes away from an unexplained heart attack. He thinks it was from all the stress, and her death shapes Jackson's presidency. So Jackson's presidency starts off with Indian removal, because U.S. Southerners want land that belongs to Indians in areas of Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama. They want it because it's fertile farming land. And so in 1832, a case goes before the Supreme Court where the Supreme Court basically says that states cannot remove Indians and they cannot tell Indians what to do because Indians are considered sovereign nations. That means they're their own country. Indian nations are their own country within their boundaries, and Congress has the power to make treaties with sovereign nations, not states. So basically they're saying it's Congress, not the states, that can do it. And Jackson says, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. You know, there's nothing stopping me. This says the states can't remove it, but the Supreme Court can't enforce that. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it myself. So he does that with the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which Congress passes and he signs. And it says the president is able to negotiate peaceful exchange of lands in the South for new lands in the West. So basically, Georgia defies the Supreme Court decision, and Jackson condones the action, and they start moving Indians out west to Oklahoma, what not called Oklahoma, called Indian Territory at the time. So they force the relocation of these Indians. They have to walk all the way to Oklahoma, and this is called the Trail of Tears because 1 out of 4 Indians die along this journey. And basically they have U.S. Army troops escorting these Indians by gunpoint along the Trail of Tears. Here you can see the map where we went from Florida and the Seminole Territory, the Cherokee Territory in Georgia, all go to the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma. The Chickasaw and Choctaw tribes as well are relocated to Oklahoma. You can see their lands are divided up in Oklahoma there. So Jackson also is famous for instituting what is called the spoils system. And that is replacing people in the federal government or the national government with people from your own party and your friends and people who supported you during your campaign. And it comes out of the old phrase, to the victor go the spoils. So let's discuss the nullification crisis and what that means. Nullification is the state's idea that they don't have to follow federal law that they don't agree with. Of course, we know that's not true now because of the Supremacy Clause, but it was back then, when we had this idea of states' rights versus national power. So the protective tariff, we haven't talked about this. A tariff is a tax on an import, and these are designed to protect American products. So if I am looking to buy a car, they want me to buy an American car because it helps our economy. But they'll put protective tariffs on foreign cars, making them more expensive. So I'm more likely to buy the cheaper car, and that protects American products. The Northerners approve of this because they're the ones making everything. They are in business and factories and textile production. The Southerners dislike it because they have to import a lot of stuff because all they do is agriculture in the South. And so 1828, Congress adopts an expensive, what the South called Tariff of Abominations. John C. Calhoun is from South Carolina. He's Jackson's vice president, and he hates this new law, and he champions this idea of nullification. The idea that states could void any federal law they deemed unconstitutional. And what we would have at that point is a patchwork of a nation. So this state is following this federal law, but this state is not following that law. They're following this law, but this state is not following that second law. And it would just be utter chaos. So Jackson supports states' rights, but he doesn't think that nullification is right. He draws the line at nullification and secession. So Jackson agrees to enact a new, less expensive tariff, but it's still unacceptable for Southerners, and Calhoun even resigns the vice presidency over it. So the South Carolina government nullifies the tariff law in 1832. They say, we're not going to pay this tax. It's ridiculous. And they threaten to secede or break away from the Union if the federal government tries to collect the tax by force. So Jackson takes actions, and he gets the authority to use troops in South Carolina, And Congress also reduces the tariff again, but South Carolina still doesn't want to pay the tax. But luckily, cooler heads prevail. They do pay the tax, but this could have been an early start to the Civil War if South Carolina broke away. Because the Civil War, while slavery certainly was an important part, it's not all about slavery. It's more about states' rights and what they have a right to do. Now, let's move on to the National Bank controversy. Jackson hates the National Bank, which was chartered again by Congress in 1816. And a charter is just a document explaining the bank's lifespan and how long it can exist and so forth. Business leaders in the North argue that the bank spurs economic growth, but Jackson, only being a man of the common people, only thinks that it serves the elite rich. So in 1832, the bank's charter is up for renewal, and Congress votes to renew the bank's charters. And Jackson vetoes the bill, and Congress is furious. So supporters of the bank form a new political party called the Whig Party, or the Whig Party. Not wig as in your hair, but Whig as in someone who supports the bank. It's formed by Henry Clay, Jackson's former vice president, not Jackson's former vice president, the person he ran against in 1824, and Daniel Webster. Clay runs against Jackson as the main opponent, and Jackson defeats him in a landslide because Jackson is convincing the people that the bank only serves the elite rich. He steps up his attack on the bank in his second term by withdrawing federal funds from it. But this leads to economic troubles later on in the 1830s, and we'll have our first big economic panic later on. So in 1836, the voters decide to elect Martin Van Buren president. And then during his term, because of Jackson's economic policies, the Panic of 1837 takes place. It's the nation's worst economic depression to that point. Jackson's main decision that led to this was deciding to stop accepting paper money for land sales. So land value and sales dropped, banks and businesses closed down, farmers lost their land, workers face unemployment. So it's really the worst economic depression in the nation's history up until that point. But still nothing to sneeze at. But because of their support of the bank, the Whigs bounce back, and this revives the party. So in 1840, William Henry Harrison wins the presidency because he was at the Battle of Tippecanoe, and Tyler too. John Tyler is his vice president. Harrison wins, decides to give a 2-hour-long speech on Inauguration Day in the frigid cold, and catches pneumonia and dies just 1 month into office. So the vice president, John Tyler, becomes president at that point. And that's a tough note to end on, but that is all that I have for you. Fill out your learning targets. I'll see you back in class. Bye-bye.